There's one position group for Michigan that really intrigues me going into spring ball. And it's one that I think can be a strength of the team, kind of like it was in 2023. And not a lot of names. We're going to talk about it for the entire episode. And that is the linebacking core. I'm excited to see what they do. We'll talk about it right here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And I want to discuss the linebackers today. We've only got two position groups left. We're also going to do the tight ends. Today is our second episode of the day. And I think that, though, the linebackers are a really intriguing group. I don't remember where I put them on my list, but it was kind of middling in terms of my confidence in them. Remember, it's safety and defensive tackle tied. Quarterback, thanks to Bryce Underwood after that. Linebacker is probably not too far behind that. I definitely feel like that is a group that can be very, very good. So let's start with the starters. Now, this is a little bit different and a little bit harder to necessarily discern here, because there have been the rumors starting back in December that Jaishawn Barham was going to move from linebacker to edge rusher. I would imagine he's still going to stay with the linebackers, and it will be kind of that Sam linebacker, that ability to rush, right? In certain packages, but I would imagine he's still going to somewhat stay. So we're gonna assume that he's gonna somewhat split time, but probably is more likely than not to be at linebacker until we see something different. Spring ball could absolutely present us a different look and make us think that things are maybe a little bit different. So I look at what they have in Jaishawn Barham and Ernest Hausmann. Again, these guys are super tall. I want to look up their actual heights because I keep on talking about them like they're 7'1", right? Like, I mean, they kind of almost might as well be, but certainly I think that you think of linebackers. Devin Bush was shorter than I am, right? That's not terribly. That's usually kind of what you see from linebackers. And Michigan's got guys that aren't necessarily the tallest guys out there. But it feels like Jaishawn Barham, who I've only kind of walked behind or walked near, right? We haven't interviewed him. He's a quiet guy. And Ernest Hausmann are both just the most, they're just both extremely tall. Okay. Signing day roster. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to get my regular roster. That's the good stuff. That's what we're looking for. Let's instead of jersey, let's go by position. Again, I think that this is a duo that we saw improve greatly over the course of the season, right? Because at the beginning of the year, they were both not really both. Like, Ernest Hausmann was okay. I don't think he was quite as good as a starter initially as he was as a reserve. I don't think he was as good as he was for the first half of the year, as good as he was when he was the starter at Nebraska. But by the end of the year, he was phenomenal. And he was the type of guy that we were like, okay, yeah, he's making all the right decisions. He's making, he's not going crazy and outrunning things. So Ernest Hausmann, he's listed at 6'2", and Jaishawn Barham 6'3". Like, they're not just an inch and 2 inches taller than me. They just aren't. They must be hunched over. I swear they're both 6'4", 6'5". I guess you're in your cleats, you're in your uniform, all that. I mean, Ernest Hausmann has some tall hair, so there's that. But they are still bigger than you kind of expect linebackers. See, Cole Sullivan's listed at 6'3". Like, that dude looks like 7 foot. I'm telling you. Nonetheless, I think that that's a duo that you can absolutely thrive with. I would be hard pressed if they played like they did in the last third of the season. I'd be hard pressed to find another Big Ten team that has a linebacking core that's on par. Ohio State, maybe just because of the talent, right? But overall, I just feel like Michigan might have the best starting duo if it is, in fact, those two. And I really like what Ernest Hausmann's instinctiveness, his ability to go find the football and make plays. Jaishawn Barham, the issue with him, obviously, was he was trying to learn the system, so athletic that he was outrunning plays with regularity. Caused a lot of problems for Michigan because he's just vacating whole areas where plays ended up being made. Or hey, he got into the backfield and then nothing happens that works. Whereas you contrast that with the Ohio State game, it felt like Jaishawn Barham was just making play after play. Kind of just didn't feel like it mattered what Ohio State did. They could not negate him. So I look at these two and I say that is a very, very solid place for Michigan to be. Now, again, there might be some tinkering. And if there is, that might kind of change a little bit of the calculus for how things go as far as the season is concerned. But I would, if you have those two, I feel like Michigan's in a spot where you can look and say, all right, we've got the defensive line and the linebacking core set. Got safety set. It's really then just becomes a question of the corner, and I still feel like you pretty much have a good idea that it's going to be Zeke Berry and Jair Hill. Who's the nickel? That's a little bit more of a question than anything, but I think if you have those two, then you're at least able to take your hands off and say, great. Now, one of the things that makes this that much better is because you have the consistency. This is something that we haven't really seen at Michigan for a long time. Consistent, well, a couple of years, but still. Wink Martindale returning as the defensive coordinator, Brian John Marie returning as the linebackers coach. Keep in mind, Chris Partridge came back, like the linebackers that were there in 2022, they might have had Jesse Minter for 2022 and 2023. They had different linebacker coaches going they had George Hilo in 22, and then they had Chris Partridge for most of 2023 before it ends up being Jesse Minter's dad, Rich Minter, for the latter part. So just having that consistency in coaching scheme, the personality that's leading them directly, all of those things. These are things that are going to pay huge dividends because you have returning players, returning coaches. You don't have to worry about all kinds of like scheme changeover and everything. They can add to that, which has already worked, right? Like now you can start actually adding things to their plate and saying like, we can get that much more exotic. And when you're someone like Wink Martindale, who certainly loves his linebackers, in his scheme, that's going to make things that much better because now he can start to look and say, he's got a year of experience of knowing what these guys can do. He can look and he can say, okay, we can do some things now. We can get more exotic. Not putting a defensive tackle out at 9 technique, but like we can get more exotic with the linebackers in particular, give them different responsibilities and all of those types of things. And then you add in the fact that I don't necessarily think that they're going to see like any massively high-powered offenses for a while. Like Oklahoma and Nebraska could be challenging offenses. High-powered, I'm not so sure. And then outside of that, it's like, okay, maybe Purdue ends up being that with Barry Odom. Certainly Ohio State you would think will be. That'll give you a lot of leeway to kind of get some things working and going. But who are the other ones? Who is going to be in rotation? That's the next question. Let's talk about that here in just a moment. But before we do, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. There are a lot of questions when it comes to linebacker, who's going to be the starters because of what we talked about. Will Jaishawn become a permanent edge? I mean, that will bolster the edge group that much more, but I would rather keep with the Derek Moore TJ Guy tandem and keep Jaishawn Barham on the field as much as possible. Unless you're going 3 edge rushers, which I mean, I guess you can figure out something schematically to make that work. But I would kind of more have it go that way. Now, if it isn't Jaishawn Barham, I would put odds on Troy Bowles. Now, Troy Bowles doesn't have a lot of stats to his name. He's going to be new to the scheme. He's the son, at least, of Tampa Bay head coach Todd Bowles. He was at Georgia, who collects linebackers like, I don't really have an analogy there. But they collect linebackers. They collect 5 stars over there. And, sometimes they'll steal one, like Raylan Wilson. And I remember George Hilo telling me, he's like, man, Georgia's going to end up stealing Raylan Wilson. I know it. I mean, he didn't say that, honestly. He said, he kind of was just like, we've got to fend off Georgia. I'm doing some alternate revisionist history here. But he was leery and thought he had done a good job and then didn't really retain his job. So that didn't really help out. But yeah, I think that when you consider Troy Bull's pedigree, the fact that he'd been training with a Georgia team that has all of that depth, I think that will put him a little bit more ahead of the 8 ball compared to being a player who already knows the scheme and all of that. Now he's going to have to really work hard in spring, summer, fall camp to be able to get there, right? It's not going to be a guarantee. But I think that he's very intriguing as a guy. Again, doesn't have a lot of stats. There's not a lot we can go off of, but I just think that the pedigree, like when you're the son of a head coach, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have like this wonderful acumen, but I think it's more likely than not. And I just could see him being that guy that slides in. If not him, then you've got a couple other options. The first one would be Jimmy Rolder, who's going into his senior year. He spent most of his sophomore year injured, so he didn't see time until super late. Redshirted, came back last year, kind of was like okay, right? Like he had a really big play against Fresno State. And then like there were some times where he just kind of didn't necessarily look the part. And it's funny because he's 6'2", so he's the same size as Ernest Hausmann. I would have never guessed that. There's no world in which I would have looked at Jimmy Rolder and said like, yeah, you're the same height as Ernest Hausmann. No. You're an inch taller than me. No, I never would have thought that. But he is that big thumper type. He's the Jim Harbaugh talked about him as like the next great Big Ten linebacker. If he would have signed with Wisconsin, which kind of seemed like where he was like trending, that it all would have made sense. Everyone would have said, yeah, okay. He's the type of dude you just don't want to deal with. And I think that he's got an opportunity to really kind of come back from just like a relatively disappointing year based off of a lot of things. And I think when you're going in your senior year, you think that like, man, you're going to start. It wouldn't surprise me if he ended up starting, if it ended up being Jaishawn to edge permanently. Wouldn't surprise me if it's Jimmy Rolder, because I think he has that capability. But now, like, he's finally really getting some real time to get out there, and I think that is going to bode well. Maybe not as fast as some of the other guys, and that maybe poses a little bit of a problem. He's not as athletic as Ernest Hausmann. A little bit bigger in terms of, like, stature, but I think that he absolutely could be a guy. Now, after that, then you start to get to other names that I'm curious about. Like, Jaden Hood is one that we've talked about. He'll be going into his 5th year, assuming he's still around. I think he is. We've talked about him a lot. So I'm not really sure, right? Because it's like he's had moments good enough where they give him to us in the media, a couple of them, but then just kind of disappears. And like, but when he's in, he does okay. It's nothing flashy, nothing like crazy. Kind of just feels like he's languishing. Kind of feels like nothing's really happening there. So, people always ask, who do I think is a transfer risk? I mean, I think that would someone like him who's just kind of languishing on the bench, kind of getting in the rotation, is kind of a little bit more of your likely type of guy. I don't have any direct intel on Jaden Hood, but I'm just saying, like, it's those types of players that just don't really seem to get in very much. He's a little bit shorter than all the others. He's a little bit smaller, but that allows you to kind of put him in that Michael Barrett type of role, right? Michael Barrett was probably 6'0", 230 pounds. Jaden Hood 6'1", 225. So it gives you a little bit more shiftiness at the position that I think can be really good. The player I'm really excited for entering year 2 is Cole Sullivan. Watching footwork drills, watching him on special teams. He's a guy that flew up as a recruit, went from being a guy that no one was really talking about to being a 4-star, coming out of Central Catholic in Pittsburgh. Just a behemoth. Like I said, he's listed at 6'3", 225. He seriously looks massive. Way bigger than that. Watched him a bit in bowl prep. Thought, again, he moves really well. He has that look. Now, we haven't seen it at linebacker. He's one that I thought was going to end up playing a lot in his freshman year. Didn't end up happening that way. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up cracking that lineup and ends up playing a little bit more of a role moving forward. Then you've got a couple other guys. We'll talk about the freshmen in segment 3, but then you got a couple other guys where it's like, man, this is your really your shot. We're not going to go through like, and I can't even remember enough of some of the walk-ons that have maybe transferred. But a guy like Alexander Lidback, who I'm assuming is probably not around anymore, Joel Metzger, John Weidenbach. We're going to talk briefly about the other two scholarship guys who are Jason Hewlett, who we talked about yesterday on one of the shows. Like, bro, like it's now or never, kind of like you're going into your third year. He's 6'2", 227 listed. And it just kind of like we haven't seen him at all. Like we saw at least Jimmy Rolder freshman year. You usually tend to see like a little bit of like the good linebackers, like Junior Colson was starting in his freshman year. So, that type of thing happens, but Jason Hewlett just does not really seem like he has really ingratiated himself that much. So I'm curious to see if he finds a way to kind of break in and ends up being a guy that can at least come in the rotation, right? Like that's kind of all you're asking for is, can he at least be like Jaden Hood light in some way? And that's kind of where you're at. The other one I would mention is Zach Ludwig, who is the Ben Herbert special, 6'2", 217. He's the type of guy that, as an unranked guy, you wonder if you're going to ever see him, but don't like write it off, right? Like, but this was his freshman year last year. He kind of feels like if he's going to have an opportunity, it's probably next year rather than this upcoming season. But I think that with, just being in the system, being a guy that, at least was a scholarship guy because Ben Herbert and all of that, I think that would bode well for him. But I guess we'll see. I think the consistency at coaching staff is going to help. You would like to see more. I would have liked to have seen more linebackers come in by the portal in general because they lost 3 last year in the offseason. So you'd like to see a little bit more. At least they got one in Troy Bowles, who we talked about at the top. And it'll be interesting to see just kind of what they're able to do, what they have, or if like a Jack McKinnon type ends up kind of doing something. And they did lose one guy to the portal in Micah Pollard this cycle. So they're a little bit below replacement to some degree, which is a little concerning, but I still feel good about the group. Let's talk about the freshmen. They've got 2 freshmen, one of which I think we absolutely could see in year one. The other, not so much. We're going to talk about the freshman linebackers here in just a moment. All right, let's finish up talking about the 2 freshman linebackers. You would have liked to see them take more than 2, again, because they're below replacement to some degree. They need to be able to, like when you're losing a bunch of guys, you'd like to see them replaced. And 2 in a class, not ideal. You'd like 3, maybe 4, depending on what you're able to get. So that's something to keep an eye on moving forward in terms of the trajectory of the room. But I am excited about Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, the IMG Academy linebacker. Was a borderline 5-star to one service and is like a 3-star to another. Generally thought of as a high 4-star. Amazing pull by Michigan. His brother, Jeremiah Koromoa, Owusu-Koromoa, if I have that right, was at Notre Dame. Certainly he was in his ear, but there's something about Michigan, and this was like one of the top guys on the board, regardless of position for Michigan. Talking to people, close to the people inside the recruiting department, wink, wink. I think that, like, based off of conversations I had in the late summer, early fall last year, it was like, obviously Bryce Underwood, but they weren't talking about that because that was, again, the Sharon Moore, Sean McGee special. When it came to like the players that they were, the people inside the recruiting department were particularly like very excited about, from my understanding, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng was about as high as you could get. Like he was the one where it was just like they really wanted to know what he was going to do. And Michigan beat out all kinds of schools to get him. Now, he's on campus, comes up for bowl prep, must be dealing with an injury because he was in street clothes. But he's the type of guy, too, if you go back and read what I wrote, my interviews with him from Wolverines Wire, I'm reticent to say this because of my memory of Doug Karsh saying this about Dontrell Willis, but I think he is going to be a fan favorite. That's a verbatim Doug Karsh quote. I've yet to rib Doug Karsh on that, by the way. I've brought it up multiple times on this show. I have to say something to him next time I see him. But nonetheless, I think that Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng is, assuming he's healthy. I understand, like there's a bit of a logjam because you've got the 2 starters, you've got the other 4 that I think are probably in contention to be in rotation. I think that Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng can be that type of guy. He's not as He's not as tall as some of the others. I don't think. I think he's more 6'0". I guess I can look that up real quick. See if it tells me on this here. Looks like it will. He's 6'1", 203 at the moment. So again, kind of a little bit more of the Jaden Hood size, right? He's originally from Maryland, played at IMG Academy. Again, generally guys that play at IMG Academy, it's not like a science, but generally they're among the best of the best. I think that he's the type of guy that can absolutely break in and absolutely show out pretty close to right away. So I'm excited to see what he is going to do. You watch some film on him. He's an instinctive guy. He's a heat-seeking missile. He's the type of guy that you want. Now, the other freshman doesn't get talked about nearly as much, a little bit bigger. That's Chase Taylor out of Stockbridge, Georgia. He's 6'2", 213, enlisted by Michigan as a signee. But he is a guy that, again, when I talk to the people who were in the know that had like some kind of actual opinions that matter, they were like, oh yeah, like he's not just a guy, because, you know, remember, a lot of people who are kind of into the recruiting aspect of it look at a 3-star that doesn't have like the most impressive offer sheet and say, you get him, then cool. If not, but no, they were looking at him like, yeah, no, this is a guy that we really, really, really want. So I would not be surprised if he ended up being a big player down the road. I obviously do not think that he is going to be a big player this year. There's enough heat for some of the other players that I think that you can say, okay, no, like it's kind of fine where it is. Okay. Like, you don't need to get him involved in year one. Not an early enrollee. Chances are it's going to take him a little bit of time. But I would say more like junior year. Don't be surprised if he ends up being a dude. You know, like, remember Rod Moore was as a safety, was a 3-star, ends up playing a lot in his freshman year. So, I mean, it can happen. But I think that they've got such a logjam at the position that it's unlikely. And if they're going to pick one of the two, it's going to end up being Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. So I'm excited about him. And I know that Michigan was very excited to be able to get Chase Taylor. So there you go. All right, that's going to do it for our linebacker breakdown. We are going to have tight ends for our second show of the day, as we're doing 2-a-days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.